Good evening. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
How are you, darling?
I'm good. I am good. I'm a little tired. I'm glad it's Friday.
Yeah, me too. But this
Glad to
is
be
a great way to cruise out of the week.
absolutely. I was going to say I'm glad to be here with you tonight. Glad to be here with everybody watching. And yeah, glad it's Friday, but I'm glad to be here. This has become really the highlight of my week, and I've been looking forward to it.
Oh, I appreciate that. It is for me as well.
Mhm.
It is. And even on the nights where I think, oh, God, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to suck. It's going to be awful. I'm going to look like a swamp hag, and then I come on and everything just flows so beautifully. And
Yeah.
I feel good and I feel uplifted and I don't give a damn how I look and I just go with it. It's great. It's just great.
One, you
So,
always look great.
well, thank
One.
you. That's
Okay.
very sweet. I'm not
Yeah.
fishing for compliments.
I know you're
Believe
not,
me,
but
my hair is only flat because it's wet. It is
yeah.
slightly damp. Okay, we'll put it that way. Okay. Was windy here today. I really did look like something that blew in on a stolen broomstick. I really did. But we stay in touch across classes and sessions. So everybody, just put your feet up on the desk because these two people here aren't going to see you do it, and just relax and try to take this in, because really what we're going to do tonight is discuss something that we've discussed many times. We're just going to come at it from a slightly different angle. um, the Essentia Foundation, which I follow a lot of their work. They turn out some beautiful literature from brilliant people. Have published Dr. Jeremy Benham, PhD, I believe, in metaphysics. And his treatise, it's more than an essay, I would say a treatise, is Thoughts Are More Real Than Objects. Now, for as long as we've been doing this show, Jeff, which is now we're coming up on a couple of years, or just past, but I mean, we've been at this for a while, and many times we have discussed the power of the mind, the way that nothing exists that we create in our physical world that didn't begin first as a thought, a dream, a vision, an idea,
Mhm.
a concept in our mind, consciousness, and then we create it in the real world with the whatever we pluck from our environment. Cut down a tree to make a table,
Mhm.
basic stuff like this, all the way to dig up copper in the desert and make computer chips out of all kinds of rare earth minerals and so on and so forth. So that's how it works. That's what we perceive as reality. And so I'm going to read just a little of the opening first. We'll start there. Um, Idealism is often regarded as a philosophy entailing that the world exists just in our heads, which is obviously false. Rising philosophical star Dr. Jeremy Dunham argues that this view of idealism is a misconception. Idealism is a much more realist worldview than we think, and more realist than its alternatives, as it does not deny the existence of the most real things there are, thoughts. This essay is the latest installment in their series, A Return to Idealism. Um, and then it just gives what institutes it's related to and stuff. So just as this his beginning, what is idealism? Throughout history, in most cases, philosophical idealism is a metaphysical position. The idealist is concerned with reality's fundamental nature. It is often mistakenly thought to be a reductive theory of the fundamental nature of reality. Many critics have supposed that the idealist tries to reduce reality to the subjective states of individual minds. According to this form of subjective idealism, there is no world outside our minds. This view is often associated with the British empiricist Bishop Berkeley, who lived from 1685 to 1753. Famously, when told that such idealism was irrefutable, the English author Samuel Johnson, of whom we are both intimately familiar, shouted, "I refute it thus," and kicked a stone. The idealist, therefore, is thought to be the one who denies. They are anti-realist, anti-materialist, anti-naturalist, and certainly anti-stones. So I thought that would be a really good place to start because, through both inductive and deductive reasoning, logic dictates that we have all of our sensory perceptions tuned into our environment. But it would be nothing but an environmental experience if we did not have the cognitive ability to process what we're seeing, what we're experiencing, what we're touching, the aroma in the air, this, the sun burning on your skin, your eyes closed because it's too intense. To have, a visceral reaction to watching a thunderstorm roll in very quickly and ferociously. That whoosh of adrenaline that fuels and powers this vessel, one of its fuels. And I think that's why people like scary movies. It makes them feel more alive, to scare them to death. I really do. I think that's why that happens. Not me. I don't fall in that category. Give me a really good stage play or a musical or a parade or anything, but not scary movies. So idealism has existed the philosophy of idealism has existed for more than 500 years. But in that amount of time, it has morphed and morphed, as most philosophies, concepts, ideas do. They grow, they change, they evolve, they burgeon, they shrink away if they're, becoming obsolete. But idealism has, I consider, if somebody says to me, you're such an idealist, I take that as a compliment. For me, translate that not as some kind of an accusation, but that I am reality based. It's just that I have a really big reality.
Yeah.
My reality is physical, the physical world and the metaphysical plane, different realms, different beings that I engage with in a very peaceful, tranquil, intelligent way. That does not inspire fear in me at all, whether it be spirits or, the galactic family. There's no fear. There is wonder. There is curiosity. There is fascination. There is love. There are feelings that are deep rooted inside me. And that makes my interaction with them idealistic, and ideal. I guess each one of us, like an applique that you put on your blue jeans and hit it with the iron until the glue melts into the denim. And I think that to be an idealist is to really comprehend the significance and the power of creativity, what exists in our consciousness and our mind that burgeons into, literally manifests in our worldview externally.
Yeah.
And I don't think of it as it very much like, you remember we did the piece a couple of weeks ago, Naturalism is Dead, that the world is so much more than, that which we can interpret with our five senses.
Yeah.
That we in turn use our sixth sense and beyond, our instinct, our intuition, our sensitivities and sensibilities to connect with the greater existence. And I think that that's what idealism is. So in a way, it's the opposite of naturalism. And in another way, it's an extension of naturalism. Like naturalism, you just start there. You start with just the world around you, what you can see, smell, taste, touch. Okay, that.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And that is all. In some of the philosophy of idealism, it's been written as though everything only exists in the mind, which was the beginning of the experience of the message of the essay. And that it's all in the mind. Well, I can touch this glass. It's cold to the touch. It has ice in it. It's wet. I can feel, it's, as he says, obviously false.
Right.
It is so much more. And for me, I have suddenly taken to the idea of revisiting idealism in a much more effusive and affectionate way. Instead of me trying to get smaller to fit into the philosophy, I'm making the philosophy fit into my universal view.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's that. So what do you think?
Yeah. There's a lot to say there. Just to like comment on the thing you said right at the end about making a philosophy sort of fit your experience rather than forcing your experience of life and reality into a philosophy. I think that's the way to go, and I think that's what happens after you test out enough philosophies and you also realize that they are all just philosophies, right? That's often the way that I talk about my practice of Christianity. I say, I use the word, but I know when I say it, you're thinking something very different from what I'm meaning. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because I've walked through enough valleys and tried to climb enough mountains and fallen down them and been there and back again enough times to where it just doesn't mean to me what it once does. And so now I take my experience of reality and I make this belief system a sort of let's say a sort of narrative into which I fit my experience because I see the patterns, but I'm not going to try to fit my experiences into someone else's narrow interpretation of it. And I think once those lines of distinction are gone in our minds and we realize what a philosophy is and isn't, we can play with it a lot more. And so I love that. As for idealism itself, I am not I am not extremely well read in the field of philosophy of idealism. I'll tell you, but I didn't realize the article you sent actually was from the Essentia Foundation, which is Bernardo Kastrup's group. And I'm vaguely aware of. I know who he is. I've listened to some of his talks and kind of his metaphysical approach to idealism. And I think I do like the way that he actually explains the. I guess you could say the splintering of the divine mind, which I don't know if that's what he would use, but of a sort of universal mind that is fragmented, let's say, that we all are. And so everything we see is mind. It is all this greater mind manifest outward. And one of the ways Kastrup describes it is he describes it as an alter, which an alter in psychology is a fragment of a personality in a way. So if you experience a trauma, there's dissociative identity disorder where an individual can literally develop a sort of a different identity to sort of deal with the greater trauma that they've experienced. A part of them that is traumatized will sort of fragment off and to sort of save the rest of the person from having to experience what this fragment of the personality did. And it kind of becomes its own entity in some ways. And there have been individuals documented who have had, dozens and dozens and dozens of these alters or these other personalities, we used to kind of call them. And the thing about them is they're not always aware of the existence of the other personalities. So Yeah. So it's one
Symbol.
mind
Yeah.
splintered into many manifestations. It is one mind, but it's manifest as many minds. So that just goes to show that even the human brain has the ability to splinter itself off into different manifestations that don't recognize they're all part of one mind.
Right.
And that has to do with trauma. And so if you so to speak of the divine mind having manifested in that fashion would be more of a Gnostic claim, and it would have kind of more of a fall aspect to it. And I don't think Kastrup necessarily means that when he talks about it. It's just a very useful illustration to explain how it is that mind can splinter and become many things, even though it's one thing. And I think it's actually a pretty brilliant illustration for that. That it's very possible to see multiple persons manifest from one person, but they're all one mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and yeah, so there's that. So I think that's a really brilliant way of looking at it, and it's not my idea, so I can call it brilliant. Um, um, so yes, that is very possible. The other thing to think about is that literally everything that we see in the world is literally mind stuff. I mean, for one, just for simple starters, everything that I'm looking at right now, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at my computer screen, I'm looking at the ring light in the background, the microphone right in front of me, whatever, my Batman shrine right here. Um, which you can see the bat signal in the window right back there if you look, about reflecting from my wall.
I
Um,
do see it.
yeah,
Yes.
it's
There
there.
it is.
Yeah, this corner, it's like a nice little cozy room. Then over here, it's all Batman stuff. Um, um, but I'm looking at all of this stuff. But what's actually happening is the light is reflecting off of these objects, bouncing into my eyes. All of these muscles and whatever are receiving this light, sending it to my brain, and my brain is interpreting what's being sent to it. So when I'm looking at something, I'm actually seeing the contents of my own head out here, right?
Right. You're
Because,
you're John Tenney
Mhm.
describes it exactly the same way.
Yeah,
That whole process,
yeah,
exactly. So the way he ends that little blurb in his talk is, so when somebody tells you it's all in your head, just say, yes, you're absolutely right.
yeah, exactly. And there's that great line in Harry Potter at the end when Harry's talking with Dumbledore when he's sort of in between life and death, and he's like, "Is this all happening in my head?" And he's like, "Of course, but why should that matter? What would that make it any less real if it were just happening in your head?" And the answer is, of course not. So like literally the entire world that we interact with every day, it's the stuff of mind. It is our mind receiving light, interpreting it, and I am perceiving Batman and in about 100 different variations in front of me here, but that's my brain doing that and then kind of projecting that back outwards. So that is the stuff of mind that I'm witnessing. But I also can test out the stuff of mind. I can reach out and touch it and find that it's solid. It's not ephemeral. It's not, my hand's not going to go through it. It's solid material, but it's also the stuff of mind. And so mind matters, right? Mind materializes in that sense. The material exists independent of whether or not my mind is perceiving it and processing that image, but it is still the stuff of mind that I'm beholding and really interacting with.
And the essential nature of that figurine,
Mhm.
whatever it is made of, whatever, composites, whatever artwork went into it for the
Mhm.
design,
Yep.
that all began as a concept in
Yeah.
mind.
Exactly. And that's the next part. Well, and one of the other things though is that I can look at, so I'm looking at certain pieces right now. My wife got me a couple of those. My kids got me one of those. There's something my daughter made. It's Batman holding two little kids' hands, and it's like something she made for me that was very special. So not only am I perceiving objects, but I'm also imbuing them with meaning. I am imprinting emotion on different ones. And then there's other ones that are a little more inert. They don't mean as much to me. They're cool looking, but they don't mean to me the same thing. Some of them are more valuable. I have a piece of the money from the movie The Dark Knight when the Joker is sitting on the big pile of money and it's burning. I have a set piece behind glass there from the set. I mean, so that one's very valuable to me. So I imbue it again with a little bit more meaning and value. And it's So not only is my brain processing images, it's also impressing certain ones of these things with different meanings. So like, but it's all the stuff of mind.
Mhm.
And then also, exactly as you said, though, every single one of these objects, every single book to my left, book to my, my six here, everything I'm looking around, the computer screen, the coffee cup, all of this is also the stuff of mind. This was all seen and imagined. It was seen up here, and it was given birth to in the physical world. And so it literally is, the scripture says, gird up the loins of your mind. And I'm taking the illustration way too far, but I love the wording. If you can get past the literal and look at it from a metaphorical angle,
Mhm.
gird up the loins of the mind. What would that mean? Loins are reproductive organs. That the mind is a reproductive organ in some way. And so everything we're looking at, everything that we are perceiving, was first conceived in the mind, the way that a child is conceived, and then it was created. And we're like, well, yeah, but that's, because we'll talk about things like manifestation, and you know um you know some of the famous, new thought teachers like Neville Goddard or Joseph Murphy, or a lot of these, Florence Scovel Shinn, or all these very popular new thought writers who, talk about the power of imagination, and literally causing, effectual change in the real world simply through shifts in the mind and consciousness, and the way that you're thinking and what you imagine and how you imagine it. And but then when we think about that, we think of it in a very, again, we think of it very ephemerally. And we're like, well, yeah, sure, someone came up with the idea to, make a, well, I'm looking at Batman figures, so let's just talk that. Or the Canon camera that's in the corner there. Yeah, someone came up with an idea to fashion a camera that works this way and created it. But that's not the same thing as like, you know, imagining something into existence through, the law of whatever. And it's like, yeah, it is. It's just we've disenchanted the world.
Mhm.
So we don't look outward and see that all of this stuff leapt from the imagination of humankind, that none of this stuff was. We
Yeah.
were, and I think, in the creation account of Genesis, we always talk about, it's always it's a credo that, God created the world ex nihilo, or out of nothing. But that's not the case. Actually, if you look in Genesis, there's chaos and disorder,
Yes.
and God speaks into the chaos and disorder and pulls from that raw material creation, and then it keeps going, and then he creates humankind, creates animals, brings the animals to the humans, and says, you give them their names. And the humans give them their names, and when they give them their names, it's like they kind of turn on almost, and
Mm.
it's like that there's this continued process of creation that we're supposed to be a part of. So it starts with the one mind, even if we're just using that as a metaphor. And it, again, reality's fractal. So all the way down, it's creation. And so everything we look at, it's literally mind
Mhm.
outside of us. This is mental stuff that we're experiencing. The
Yes.
material is mind.
Well, people think of all that we're discussing as something that would fall into the category of New Age,
Mm-hmm.
but a wonderful writer from many, many decades ago wrote a lovely book called The Yearling, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, and the whole book was fabulous. But I remembered one phrase that has traveled with me in mind every day of my life since. And it is the phrase, the cosmic secrecy of seed.
Hmm.
And in my own books, I credit her and make reference
Hmm.
to it time and time again in different scenarios and different circumstances, say at the farm or, other things I've got going on.
Yeah.
Um, but to have
Hmm.
that seed planted
Yeah.
in mind, to have when I think of how many seeds have been planted in my mind and have grown into what I perceive to be a very opulent garden,
Hmm.
um, kind of a Garden of Eden,
Hmm.
where thoughts are absorbed into my fertile ground
Yeah.
and treated with lovingly, watered properly,
Mm.
and sprout and grow new ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what keeps us going.
Mm.
Thoughts are things.
Yeah.
That's why I say, if you want to change the world, you can think it into a better place.
Yeah.
You can literally change the world with your thought patterns, your
Yeah.
vibration, how you resonate with others,
Mm.
what frequency you share and you ride with others.
Mm.
That wave of consciousness that it's sweeping all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
People are reaching out to each other in ways I've not ever witnessed before.
Yeah.
And there's a very large community of people coming together who, I guess, if they really thought about it, would probably qualify as the idealists
Mm.
among us.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
ones like myself who I see the way, I see a better way.
Mm.
And if people will just change their minds about how it is versus how it could be,
Mm.
I'm not saying that Earth will ever be a utopia, but
Sure.
I am saying that we can and do make a difference
Yeah.
every day in every way that we exist
Mm.
and choose to think and grow and evolve
Yes.
literally on a day to day basis so that every single person that we encounter, every animal that we touch, every you know, tree that we admire as it's, coming into its full springtime splendor, makes a difference in healing the world and uplifting those that we encounter.
Mm.
Being their reason to smile that day
Yes.
is the easiest thing in the world to do.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
just the easiest thing in the world to do. And
Mm.
yet, so many people are so afraid of being rejected
Mm.
that they just don't take the chance to engage that way.
Yeah.
Somebody getting off a bus, somebody getting on. What does it hurt to say good morning, ma'am, or thank
Amen.
you, sir?
Yep. Yeah. No, and like you just said, thoughts are things, right?
Mm,
So if thoughts are things, that means that things are thoughts. So everything that we are surrounded by right now are thoughts. They
thought
are,
to existence.
yeah,
Yes.
they are thoughts that now matter in the sense of matter as a verb.
Matter. Exactly.
Yes. They're thoughts that are now matter. They matter. And as you said, so think about this, guys, everybody listening. You are daily giving birth to things. You are daily giving birth to physical realities. Everything you write down on a piece of paper is something that did not previously exist in this physical world,
Right.
right? Every time you set your fingers to clacking on your keyboard, something comes into existence in this physical world that did not exist before.
Mhm.
Whatever it is that you do, whatever it is that you do in your profession, whatever it is you do, like whatever your passion is, when you do it, something comes into existence that did not exist before. That's why I always tell people, if an idea comes to you,
Write it
write
down.
it down immediately. And for some, they can do it on their phone or on their computer. I have journals. I have to write it down physically.
I have to, me too. A
Yeah.
paper and a pen.
Yeah. And I have different color markers that I write down different sorts of
Me too.
thoughts on because it just makes me feel a different way. I have a gold one, I have a green one, I have a red one, I have an orange one. They all mean different things to me. And but and then I have a black one too. But they all whatever. But when I write it down and I see it as a creative act. It's magic. I mean, it's the closest thing to magic. I'm literally taking all these potentialities, all this stuff that's just here. It's ephemeral stuff of the mind. And when I'm like, I'm going to write that down, I take it, I create it into something solid and real, and I give birth to it here in this reality. And it exists now. Prior to that, existed only along my mind, but now it's pushed out into the world. It's real. It's here. I've given birth to something. And we do that every day. Thoughts are things. That means that things are thoughts. So what exists outside of us are the thoughts that came either from us or from someone else, which is why you can interface with an object, and in interfacing with an object, you can interface with the mind that brought that object into being in some way. Why? I mean, because you're experiencing the intention of the creator. I mean, that's very simple. And it's like this coffee cup was intended to have a certain texture, to evoke certain feelings and certain thoughts. I drink. I mean, I'm just weird. I'm a very aesthetic person, so I have different mugs I drink from at different times of the day and
Depending on
different
my
beverages.
mood, how it's going to feel in my hand.
Yeah. And but it puts me in a certain state of mind. And
Yeah.
their creators intended for something like that to be, at the very least. And so, like, it's an object, but it's also a thought. This is a thought. This magic rectangle that has more power in it than the space shuttles that's, took people to the moon. This is a thought. There was intention behind this. So when I interact with it, I'm interacting with the minds of those who brought it into being. I'm experiencing reality as they desired for me to experience it. Whatever app I open, whatever kind of social media I'm on, I am experiencing the thoughts and the intentions of certain people. And sometimes those people aren't great. That's why you got to be careful what it is you're interacting with, right? You don't want to just willy-nilly interact with everything. There are minds out there of a darker nature. And
And
they
there
give,
are also forces
yes.
of a darker nature.
And then that also raises the question. These forces that are of a darker nature, are these mind conceived and given birth to? You in occult circles, you talk about egregores. A more progressive Christian theological way of thinking of it is the powers, but that there are thought forms. Annie Besant, I think, there's the whole book talked about thought forms. But that when enough people, let's say, hold a certain thought in mind and project it outward, it becomes more than just a thought, more than just a person's thought. It literally becomes something that you're controlled by in some way, which is why you can move all of the thinkers out and move new thinkers in, and they will be influenced by the thought of the former thinkers. And that's kind of like an egregore. That's a thought that's become bigger than the thinkers because it's been so externalized, right? So I guess I say that to say your thoughts are powerful. What you entertain up here is powerful. That's why, I mean, I don't want to like be condemning to anybody, but I mean, if you just live on a steady diet of smut and violence, I mean, don't be surprised when your life is violent and smutty.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're going for, well, okay. I mean, but it's I mean, it's reality, and you'll notice that what you entertain, what you constantly are entertaining up here in the courtroom of your mind, it will manifest in the outside world.
Interesting that you should have used that word, because that's what I've been, for very focused on in the last week or so, or courtrooms, been watching a lot of news.
And I don't know why I even used that illustration, because it didn't make sense. It came out of my mind.
No, but it did, because, that's kind of where, honest to God, I feel like I could take a test that would be administered at the end of law school after the first year and pass it with flying colors. I feel like I've learned so much. I mean, this is a civics lesson that's going on all over the country and all over the world.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've learned a lot about the law. It's so interesting that you should have chosen that word, but you're absolutely right. We interface and evolve.
Yes.
Through that process of, what are we feeding into? It's why I don't watch horror movies.
Right.
I don't like any imagery of blood and gore. Certainly can't handle anything sadistic. Can't handle anything with violence against women, and that's just everywhere. I just can't.
Yeah.
And so I don't.
Yeah.
And I make sure that I feed myself a steady diet of whatever will either make me laugh, make me sing, or make me think.
Exactly. Yeah, and don't mistake that for prudishness. I hope anybody isn't hearing that. It's not.
Oh,
That's
I'm
not
a
a matter
prude.
of.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm very
yeah,
proudly a prude. I'm
yeah,
65 years
and
old. I'm a spinster and a prude.
and hey, you know what? In certain areas, I really am myself. I'm a bit of a traditionalist in a lot of ways, even though I come off differently. I just kind of am. But like,
I am too.
but I'm also, I'm understanding and open and progressive and like whatever floats your boat.
And I'm all of
Yeah,
that too, but I
yeah,
also believe in tradition and institutions and
yeah. Well,
uh
and I'll tell you one thing I've seen, Andrea, is and this has been of great concern for me, and I've been like struggling with this the last couple of years, because I've worked a lot in um, what's called the deconstruction space, which
yes.
that might um, and that's kind of a term that's evolved over time, but it was kind of a group of us who were kind of publicly talking about the deconstruction of evangelical Christianity going back about 12 to 15 years ago.
Hmm.
And in recent times, it's kind of snowballed and evolved into a more anti-Christian movement in general.
Which
And
I cannot
yeah,
comprehend. I cannot
yeah,
wrap my head around it.
no, and I can't really either. And I have my moments of feeling um, a little bit bad for being part of giving birth to something like that. But none of us were trying to do that. We were just sharing our stories openly and living out our journeys. But I get it. People, we grew up, we've all been in very abusive religious situations, and so shedding that BS is great and it needs to be done. But there's a difference between becoming mm, when you become anti that thing, because here's the thing, that is something that's been birthed from the mind as well. And what it ultimately represents, like the archetype that resides over Christianity, despite all of the crap and the craziness and the horrible stuff that's been done, it's all been done contrary to the spirit of it. Because the
Yes,
spirit of it is the spirit of Christ, which is an archetype representing ultimate self sacrifice for the sake of another, you
right.
know? And that's why, for me, that always rises to the top of any philosophy I've involved myself in, because to me, at the end of the day, laying down one's life for the sake of another, especially one who can't do anything back for you, to me, I don't think there's anything higher I can do.
No, it
So,
is the most noble act and the most noble cause.
and I agree, and I might not always feel that way, but I every day strive. It's one of the things that almost, I won't say shook me out of atheism, but opened up my eyes to the fact that there's a different way of living this out. As I realized, even if I came to the conclusion that Jesus was a complete myth, that he didn't even exist as a historical figure, I would still follow and emulate him.
Hmm.
And I was like,
The message.
yeah, it was like, if I can, then maybe there's something more to that, and that was one of the things that made me think more about it. There's the character in C.S. Lewis's The Silver Chair,
Hmm.
Puddleglum, who says of Aslan, the Christ figure, even if there is no Aslan, I'd still live like a Narnian, right? And
Hmm.
so that's how I see it. So if one becomes anti that, again, you're almost see archetypes. If you read Jung's book Aeon, he
Ah.
talks about archetypes in the way that they're almost, so like during World War II, Hitler was called up. He was like called upon by a nation who was experiencing certain collective emotions. And they called for a dictator in some ways. That archetype was almost summoned in the collective, and there was
Mhm.
someone there to fill that role, right? Trump is something similar. Any type of figure like that, there's something in the collective that calls for a certain type of personality. And then there's always somebody there who has all the proclivities and idiosyncrasies that make them fit that just right. But
Mhm.
that's to say that archetypes are their grooves worn into the floor of the collective unconscious from constantly moving in certain patterns.
Mhm.
Um, they exist as things, right? And so you can think of them as spirits. You can almost think of them as deities in some ways, but they exist. They're real, and you can call upon them in some way. Jung talked about engaging them and how you need to be careful about engaging archetypes, because you can really get taken over by them. Even if you just think of them as mental projections that have become bigger than the
Mhm.
minds that projected them, you
Mhm.
really can get kind of caught up by it. And so, anyways, I mean, I think there's archetypes that are sort of over in some symbolic sense. And of course, I'm speaking of things that are almost unspeakable. And that's why it sounds like fantasy. But These are symbols for things that we know are real because we see them happen. We just don't necessarily know how to talk about them. But there are, in some way, archons or archetypes that are kind of over these different systems. And so if you become anti a system that has as its core self-sacrifice, right? Well, what's going to manifest? The opposite, a kind of, instead of sacrificing oneself for the benefit of the other, you end up getting, sacrificing the other for the benefit of oneself. And I've seen that manifest a lot in this particular movement, and it's been of great concern to me, because I'm like, look, you don't have to be a prudish, conservative, fundamentalist, evangelical nut job to know that you shouldn't just abandon your your kids and your spouse to whom you've made a commitment. Whatever, things don't work out between people, and that happens. But I mean, I've seen people just have a change in their religious beliefs, and they're gone. And it's like, yeah, you know what, I don't really think you get to do that. I mean, you can do it, but you can't do it without destroying the things most precious to you. And I've seen that manifest, and I'm not just picking on that one issue, but I've seen it manifest in several ways like that. But it's like, well, that's kind of what happens when you set yourself against this powerful symbol and archetype. Whether you think it's real or it's actually God or not, it's a symbol and it's something that's real. If you're you will begin to manifest the opposite in terms of what you're thinking. You might, and you'll get taken over in some sense, to the point that you don't even know what you're generating, because that's kind of how archetypes work. And then you just become like, in the Matrix, you're just a battery in a pod powering this larger machine that's giving birth to things you might not even necessarily want to, but you've been taken over by something, and you are now a generator. I don't know.
Yeah,
that was a bunch of random thoughts.
I know of instances of that happening with people. I've personally seen it, so
yeah,
I know you understand what you're speaking about. Yeah, and that's one of the things that once you accept the, I think, fundamental truth that thoughts are things.
Yes.
The instant that you accept that premise as truth, you then become responsible for your thoughts.
Absolutely. Yep.
And how you channel them, what information you gather from where. You're suddenly responsible for using, as my mother would say, the good sense God gave you. It's and using them deliberately for the greater good.
Yes.
And when what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're writing, what you're thinking, you're protesting, what you're expressing out into the world in whatever way that is ultimately detrimental to someone else, that's a time to pause and reflect.
Yeah.
On, how am I? Okay, I own my thoughts. I channel my thoughts. I am a creator through my thoughts. I live through my day-to-day random chaotic life with being bombarded by different thoughts.
Yeah.
When we harness them, when we control them, when we master, to the extent we are able, master our own minds, wrecked, our choose them, with them, and then direct them out into the world.
Yes.
Always leading with love. When we get that down to a science, we're golden. We're golden, because each day, each one of us that lives in this, dare I say, idealistic bubble of joy, to the extent that we can create it, just living authentically.
Yeah.
By doing that, we heal the world.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I've said it once on this show. I've said it I won't exaggerate, at least a dozen times. Um, but as with the micro, so with the macro, as above, so below,
So
right?
low.
On earth as it is in heaven. Reality is fractal. The larger whole is made up of what exists on the smaller fractal level, right? Reality is self-similar. Your life, how it happens, how it plays out. There's always going to be aberrations. Things will come into your life that you didn't attract. I don't agree with the sort of what I agree with the law of attraction, but I think it can be abused to where you're telling people all this bad stuff you brought on yourself. Obviously, I don't think that way, But tragedies happen, and you didn't think it into being, because you accidentally had a negative thought. We're not talking about things like that.
Right. Right.
Martin Luther said, you can't keep a bird from flying around your head, but you can keep it from building a nest there. So we're not talking about you had a bad thought and I caused this tragedy. No, 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 no. That's not how this works. But we're talking about consistently what you entertain here, what you hold court with up here, what you hold in your mind. It will solidify and become reality when you hold it there. It will. It will.
Yes.
Even if it's only because it changes you so much that you begin to act in certain ways that bring certain things into your life. It's the way it works. You know, and you said earlier, I was thinking of Emile Coué, and right as I was thinking of Emile Coué, you said the words every day in every way. And Emile Coué was a French mind theorist who came up with the affirmation, I guess we'll call it. Every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. And
Yes.
he put this forth as being key. To say it 21 times, he suggested people do not knot up a rope and say it like you would a rosary in the morning when you're in the sort of half
Yes.
in between sleep and waking state. And he was like, to him, he was like, I think this is just the most perfect affirmation you can say, because you're just saying every day. So without fail, constantly,
Mhm.
simple, in every way. So it's happening on every level. There's no level in which it's not happening. I'm
Mhm.
getting better and better. There's nothing negative there. Your brain can't tease out the implications of that statement and find something negative. All you
Right.
said is every single day, in every imaginable way, I'm getting better and better. So he tried to distill it down into the simplest form. And he said, when you wake up in the morning and when you're falling asleep at night, say that to yourself about 21 times. And he was like, it'll change the way you think. Now, the way you and I go back and forth and talk.
Yes.
When I first heard that syrupy, sweet, sing-songy little thing, I was like, that's cheesy, man. Come on, give me some depth and some meat. But I came to a point in my life where I was desperate.
Hmm.
I came to a point in my life where I was desperate. My mind betrayed me in some way. And I'm just saying that to be metaphorical, but it was like I was in a state I never thought I would be in mentally. I was experiencing. I've never been a depressed person, but I was in a very depressed state, and it was the first and only time I felt that low. And I just I didn't know what else to do because I didn't feel like praying. That just didn't seem right in the moment. I
Mm.
wasn't in a state where I felt like I could even do that. So I remembered Emile Coué, and I was like, okay, let's give this a shot. And I lay on my back in the pool and floated and just
Hmm.
trusted I was being upheld. And I
Hmm.
stared up at the sunny summer sky and I just began to say it to myself. And I said it again. And I said it again. And I felt stupid. And I said it again and I felt even more stupid. But the more I said it, something began to like rise up in me and my mind began to click. And I'm telling you, I sat in the pool for about 20 minutes saying that to myself. And I went through about a year, maybe a year and a half, where I would do exactly what Coué said every morning. I would wake up saying to myself every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. And I had a certain cadence and a way in which I would say it. And I would kind of get into this flow. And I would wake up and I would feel like I was glowing, like I was alive, like I was pulsating with energy, like, oh, wow, I am only ever going up, never going down. And it changed the way that I thought. It's simple, about
Hmm.
as simple as you could get, but it
Yeah.
literally changed the way that I thought. It changed the trajectory of my life, literally the path that I came to a crossroads in that moment because of my emotional state, where I was because of certain things that had happened. And I knew you choose right here and right now. And I
Yeah.
couldn't find anything else in that moment to reach for than this simple mantra of positive thought.
Yes.
And I latched onto it because it was
Yeah.
all I had. And it manifested in my life in power. Books
Mhm.
came from this. A whole new way of life and being came from this. Our connection, I believe, came from this. This show
Yes, I
for
do
me
too.
came from that. It changed everything. And it was so simple. It was a simple shift in thought. And we don't know, we just don't realize how powerful the thoughts that we think are. And we
Yeah.
think it has to be some crazy affirmation, and we've got to use all these spiritual words. And, it
No,
doesn't have to be that.
the
It can be,
simpler the better. Repetition is the key.
yep. And
Repetition is the key.
yeah. And
You
I'll
do
just say because
enough sit-ups, you're gonna have a flat stomach.
that's it. You
It's
do it enough.
just that simple.
You do 20 sit-ups every morning, you might feel like you're not doing anything. Give it a year or so.
Yeah.
You'll see a difference. I just want to say to somebody listening to this, maybe you need to try that, because I feel like maybe there is some desperation listening tonight.
Mhm.
Try that simple affirmation. Maybe you're at the bottom. Tailor it, as we said at the beginning, with idealism. Tailor it to your situation, not necessarily your situation
Tailor
to
it
it.
to your situation and find the words that work for you.
It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that, and keep it simple.
Yes.
And on that, we have to close down the classroom. Unfortunately, I'm going to hop on over to A World Awakening in a minute. Everybody is welcome to join me there. Jeff, I appreciate you. I love you with all my heart. I thank you. You are my co-host extraordinaire.
Mm.
And so you keep sucking coffee out of that special coffee cup, and
Well,
I'm
I've
going to
got
go
4
with
of them. It tastes one
fluted
great.
crystal with the berry juice tonight. And with that, we love you all. See you next week. And class dismissed.